was fine. I think that's a pretty church. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, I got Mike involved in that for about 10 years.
In accordance with Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, be advised that notice of this meeting was made by posting on the bulletin board, town hall, and mailing to the officially designated newspapers a list of the meeting dates annually, indicating that this meeting would take place at the town hall at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday, August 16th, 2023. Roll call.
Corey Miller,
Here.
Austin Canfield, Michael Cohen,
Here.
Maggie Megan,
Here.
Judy DJ,
Here.
David Cosgrove,
Here.
Michael Zion, Vice Chair Gaston Harford,
Here.
Chair Beth Shaw.
Here. I request that you turn your good evening. We will start with approval of minutes of June 21st, 2023. We only received one copy. I don't know if Eileen, you had received any edits, comments, or corrections. Okay, does anybody have comments or corrections? Did I see one was emailed back? I thought you did. Yeah, I thought I recall.
Yeah, I did. I had questions about the pipe, and I didn't see them there.
Do you have it in front of
The
you or
storm
not?
pipe.
Do you know what line or page to reference? Or
There was no page reference. It was just left out completely.
Got it. In the discussion, so it's a heavy set of meeting notes because there was the memorialization and then there was also the application. So this was, yours was in regards to which? The application on the Annie Milburn Partners discussion?
Annie Miller. Yeah.
Okay, so we've been towards the back half and you're saying you had asked a question and that wasn't reflected in the notes. Okay. I'm just trying to look at where would be the appropriate place and the witness, was that when Mr. Penke was giving his witness? No, he would have been the traffic, so that wouldn't have been.
It was related to the pipe that's pitched.
Yeah,
It
we're
was
just trying
It
to,
was related to the
find-
relocation of the storm drain, a storm pipe from crosswise to 1 foot next to the foundation.
was it at the 21st meeting?
I'm not sure.
That was that was 2 meetings ago. I'm just wondering, because looking at the witness who testified, I don't know that would have been the meeting at which you asked the question. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying?
Let's just
So-
forget it then. Maybe next time
Well,
when I
let's
say
wait, yeah,
it's
and you'll
in
see
the minutes.
The next set,
All right.
understood. Okay. Any other corrections or comments on the minutes? Okay, motion to approve. Yes, Gaston,
Motion to
your
approve.
motion.
Well, if we approve it and it's not in the next meeting, so this might be a question.
Are you comfortable with us moving forward with approving
I think I'll just vote no on it, and I think the rest of you are going to vote yes, so we'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
If the vote gets to me.
Sure, so we have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? I will second. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes. All opposed? And any who are not here would abstain. Okay, so only hearing one opposition, the meeting minutes of June 21st are approved. Okay, thank you. Well, there are no new applications tonight. We have 4 technically orders of business, 2 of which are ordinances. One is the historic element of the master plan, and then the final order of business as it appears on the agenda. But I propose to do it in the reverse order tonight, is discussion of this application 22003, Annie Milburn Partners. So we'll begin with that order of business. And that is a request for reconsideration. I will turn it over to Ed to introduce. You okay?
Yeah,
Here, you can use mine if you want.
I don't know why they're not with us. We had the same thing last evening as well. Is the
You're not hearing?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I apologize for my laryngitis here. Madam Chair and members of the board, we received a request for reconsideration from the applicant's attorney regarding this Annie Miller and Partners LLC application. The request was made for reconsideration based upon a proposed revised distribution plan for the affordable housing units. Those who were at the last meeting will recall that we had a long discussion about the distribution of the units as proposed. And ultimately, the vote was taken to deny the application. And the primary basis for that was the distribution proposed for the integration of the affordable units. The applicant has now provided a revised proposal. They term it a one-time proposal, wherein they redistributed the units in accordance with floor plans that have been distributed to the board and I believe were placed online. The revised integration plan distributes the units, the affordable units almost equally, changes the numerical distribution on each floor from what they had originally proposed, and also the location of distribution of those units within or on that particular floor. The request also contained justification for what they had already proposed, and also speculated as to what options they may have in the event that the application is not reconsidered and ultimately approved. I sent the board a detailed email outlining the legal issues under attorney-client privilege. I won't go through that portion of the email that is not disclosable, but I will go through that portion that is disclosable to just refresh your recollection as to the manner in which this should be done. It is a somewhat unusual request to have the board reconsider a decision, and I had previously taken the position over the years that once the board makes a determination, there is no reconsideration of that. And the basis for that was there's nothing in the MLUL that allows that. Secondly, that the remedy is to go to court. I've since relaxed that thought process, and in fact, the applicant furnished one of the bases for that, which is an appellate division case that came down in 2020, in which the appellate division indicated that the boards have the inherent right to the manner in which they conduct their business, unless there is something specifically to the contrary in an ordinance or rules and regulations or so forth, that the board has the ability, if they so choose, to reconsider their determination. And there were some timing issues that were relevant in that case. They're not particularly relevant here, but to just get that off the table, this request was made before we've adopted any memorializing resolution. And as you all know, the resolution is the board's decision and sets forth the reasoning and the basis for the board's decision, in addition to, of course, the facts that have been presented. There was one thing in the appellate division decision that was slightly different from what we've done in the past, because some of you will recall that last year when we were considering the revised housing element and fair share plan, the board rejected the housing element and fair share plan, and the following month at the next meeting, the board agreed to reconsider their determination to deny or to reject the housing element and fair share plan. And at that time, I was following Robert's rules for reconsideration. Robert's rules provide that some member who voted in favor of the action taken, in that case it would have been in favor of denying or not approving the housing element and fair share plan. In this case tonight, it was rejecting the application, denying the application, that someone who voted in favor of that action would have to move at the next meeting, which is this meeting, to reconsider it. The appellate division didn't seem to think that that was applicable unless, again, specifically in the ordinances or the rules and regulations, there was reference to applying Robert's rules. And the case was a little unclear as to even if there is that provision, whether the board has the discretion to waive it. In any event, in Milburn, we do not have for the planning board anything on our rules and regulations, which are somewhat dated, but nonetheless they're there, that makes reference to Robert's rules. And the township committee itself does not, under the code anyway, operate under Robert's rules. There's no provision in there that says Robert's rules apply. So the change tonight from what we did back when we reconsidered the Housing Element Fair Share Plan is that based upon the case that I just referred to, I don't think we need to have a member of the board who voted to reject this application make the motion to reconsider. So anyone on the board who's otherwise eligible to vote can do that. It certainly would be preferable to have someone who voted in favor of the action taken, which was the denial of the application. But again, based upon the case, I think that that is not required. The motion, if made and seconded, and it does not have to be seconded by somebody who voted in favor of the action, the effect of the adoption of that motion is merely to put the matter back on the table, so to speak, to give the board an opportunity to reconsider it. It is not an approval of the application. It is not an action substantively on what is being proposed. You're not re-voting on the application. All you're doing tonight is determining whether you will put this matter back on the table and re-vote on it. If you agree that you will reconsider your vote, the actual discussion on the application and on this revised plan for the distribution of the affordable units will not take place tonight. It will take place at a subsequent meeting. And the reason for that is not dissimilar to what we're talking about with the Housing Element Fair Share Plan. And that is that because the basis upon which the board would agree to reconsider this matter involves a modification of the proposal that was made and that the board had on the table when they voted. And it's a substantial modification as it relates to a component and a significant component of the application, which is the affordable units. I've determined, and the applicant had also previously determined, that there will have to be a renotice of this application if the board decides to reconsider it. So you would actually discuss the substance of this plan at another meeting that would be noticed by the applicant in the same manner in which the original application was noticed. The public would have a right, after the applicant presented whatever they wanted to present and whatever witnesses they wanted to present, the board questioned them and so forth. The public would have the opportunity to ask questions, make comments and so forth. And it would be handled the same way that we handled the original application. And then a vote would be taken at that time on the actual application. So you're not voting on the application tonight, you're just voting to put this thing back on the table, put the application back on the table to consider this proposed plan. And there's some, overlap here because the basis for the request for reconsideration is, in fact, the distribution of the affordable units within the development. So, it's not as bright a line as you might want it to be. So there may be some discussion about that during the course of determining whether you want to reconsider it. But I just want to caution the board that the substance of those things and, we don't like this unit here, we think it ought to be here, or we think this is great. That should not be anything that we discuss tonight. It's just that we have a revised plan, and is the board willing to reconsider its determination based upon that revised plan? I'm prepared to answer any questions, but I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you.
I actually have a procedural question, assuming we do vote to reconsider this, so then at that subsequent meeting, is the discussion limited to just the change that was made? Or is it everything reopens and it can be on anything related to the presentation as a whole from, weeks ago?
Well, the entire decision is being reconsidered because you voted no on the application. But the substantive discussion is really related only to the distribution of units.
I have a question. Mr. Buzak, you said that the rules are dated for the planning board. You've served on the planning board how many years as the attorney?
About 10 years now,
10
10 or
years.
11 years.
So in the past, have we as a planning board used Robert's Rules of Order?
Well, we certainly did in 2022 when we did the Housing Element Fair Share Plan.
So even though the township committee doesn't use Robert's Rules of Order, it's still, we're two separate groups. So should we not still be using Robert's Rules since that's what the planning board has used and has not changed those rules?
Well, again, I think we've used them by tradition as opposed to by formal adoption. I mentioned that the rules and regulations are dated, and I didn't mean that necessarily as a criticism of the rules, but I think they were adopted back in 1980 and then they were readopted in the mid-90s or so. So they're about 30 years old and they probably ought to be re-looked at based on changes in the law and so forth. But my point was that they did not mention that you would follow Robert's rules. So again, it's up to the board as to how they want to handle it. Legally, I think based upon the appellate division case that I just cited that the applicant had provided and that the board actually has.
Is that the Lambert case?
Yes, it is.
But the Lambert case is not published case law,
That is correct. That is correct.
so it's not binding.
It is not precedential. That is correct.
Mr. Casco.
I have a question, a couple questions. I've read this letter from plaintiff's counsel, which was addressed to Bloomfield Avenue for some reason, not to our proper address. But at any rate, I did not vote on this application because I was out that application, but that date. But I have serious questions about the credibility of some of the expert witnesses, the traffic testimony that was given, and the placement of the storm drain pipe. So what I don't want to see happen, and this is a question for Mr. Buzak, is this board votes to reopen this, and then we're met with an argument that we can't reconsider those, because I certainly would have been voting no, based upon what I had heard, not based just upon the distribution of the units. And I want to make sure we're not foreclosed of that, and based on your comment a minute ago, it sounds like we might be.
No, I don't.
I don't know that everyone agrees with me.
No, I don't think you are foreclosed. The vote, as I said, is on the entire application again. The genesis or the trigger for your ability to do that is the distribution plan, because while you were not at the meeting, but did listen to the tape and certified that, so you know what happened. The focus of the discussion, I think in fairness, was the distribution of the affordable units. And at the end, that appeared to be the primary reason that the application was denied. That's my view of it. The board certainly will have.
He's asking if we have the opportunity to.
And you do.
Okay.
Okay, so
Well-
you won't be foreclosed if you feel, if the board votes to reconsider this matter and the evidence is presented and it will be limited to the distribution, your vote, anybody's vote here, is on the entirety of the application as effectively amended, utilizing this revised distribution plan.
So
I want
So
to.
it's a re-vote on the
Just-
entire application.
Yeah, what I want basically is your legal opinion on whether or not we're gonna be met with an argument from plaintiff's counsel that we can't reconsider anything else.
I don't know what you're gonna be met with by plaintiff's counsel. All I can tell you is that you can reconsider, you're reconsidering the entirety of the decision because your decision, not the board's decision, was to deny the application. And if you vote to reconsider, you're reconsidering that denial. And that's the denial of the entirety of the application, not just, you didn't just reject, the board did not just reject the distribution plan, they rejected the entirety of the application. So a revote would be similarly on the entirety of the application.
So that other, I guess what I'm asking as well, what Mr. Cosgrove was saying, there are other issues that were not put forward. That was, of course, a major part of this was the redistribution of the units. However, there are other issues, as Mr. Cosgrove was pointing out. So if this opens back up again, there should be, I just want to be clear about this too, that there's the opportunity to discuss and look at these other issues that were important, but just don't seem to be, it seems the nexus is all about the redistribution, but I think there were other things that were important as well.
All of that is on the table and can be discussed, and ultimately the board will vote either to approve the application or to deny the application as amended with this redistribution of the affordable units. But it's on the entirety of the application.
So there could still be, I guess,
Look,
there could be other changes.
The point is this, the board denied the application.
Correct.
They're now, if they vote to reconsider it, they're putting it back on the table. The board has the choice of approving the application or denying the application, if they agree to reconsider it. So you're not bound, the fact that you agree to reconsider it does not mean that you're going to approve it. It just puts the matter back on the table to give you the opportunity to vote again, and however that vote comes out, it comes out.
Are we able to add more conditions to
Oh,
the application?
absolutely.
Okay, so it's
Yes,
not
yeah,
just
we didn't
limited
even
to
talk
that.
about- Yes, we did not.
Is that
even talk
what
about
You're
conditions.
sort of asking, or?
It was broader, but
So we
certainly
have a
included,
discussion,
but broader than
And then
that.
if we feel like that is something that we do need to include in the application or in the resolution, in order to get us to the point where we do approve the application, we can add different conditions, more conditions into the application.
That
All of that is
certainly
correct.
applies.
I have a list of, I had prepared a list of about 35 conditions that had developed over the course of these hearings that I thought the board would want to consider. I didn't have an opportunity to present them because of where we were going. The motion was made not to approve, but to deny. But I do have those, and if the board wants them in advance, I'm certainly happy to share them with you if the board decides to reconsider the application. And any other conditions you may have that I may have missed or that may come up as a result of discussions.
Thank you. Great. Allison, any questions?
So what is the benefit of us reopening this and then they know that there's additional conditions or things that have not been fulfilled? What would be the difference between them going back, taking into consideration, because they certainly have a list too of what we ask for considerations. And then what is the advantage of doing it today for the applicant? In other words, for us to reopen it instead of just come to us with a new application of that list of conditions that you're putting forward.
You're saying what's a benefit to neighbor or what's a benefit?
No, the benefit to the actual applicant. Like, I don't see what the benefit of tonight is, or for them to come back with a new application.
A new application, I think we'd start the process all over.
Right.
And at this point, we've met 5 different meetings, so they would have to start that all over again. I don't know, is that correct?
Yes,
Would-
yeah,
would-
yeah,
would
they
sort
would-
of
they would
restart
have
the
to
whole
do
clock, and we would need
Okay.
to have a whole hearing.
So we couldn't take into consideration all
Not
of
if it's
their
a new
professionals. Okay, got it. That's what the answer is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? That said, does anybody want to make a motion on reconsideration? It doesn't have to be
No,
anybody.
it could be anybody who's eligible to vote, then I know that Mr. Pillar.
Everybody here is eligible
Yes.
because they testified, right?
And why does it have to be anybody can do it rather than one of the no votes?
Based on the Lambert case. And I understand that it's an unpublished case. so
Unpublished
it's
case
not
law.
Presidential, but it certainly gives us some indication of the way the courts view this.
Just one follow-up question. It's a 2020 case, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I make a motion to open for reconsideration.
We have a second.
I'll second.
Corey Miller,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Michael Cohen,
Yes.
Maggie Miggin,
No,
Srini DJ,
Yes.
David Cosgrove,
No.
Michael Zion,
Yes.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Ben Stoll.
Yes. So the motion to reconsider the application 22003 is passed, which means we need to schedule it on our future agenda. Are we doing that today, or would Eileen do that in the future?
Well, I think you should look toward Eileen and she can answer that question for us.
There's really nothing,
We don't have any completed applications for
right, so
the September meetings.
our September meeting is September
6th.
6th. September 6th, October 4th, October 5th.
Motion the drawings or the new distribution that we received, will that be presented as, are they okay?
Yes, it will.
Perfect, next time.
Yes, we'll present it next time. The applicant needs to give notice, and I see the applicant's attorney here. The meeting would be September 6th, is that right?
6th or
September 6th.
20th are two
Or the
September.
20th. Mr. Lucino.
Oh, we actually only meet once in September.
What about the 20th? Is that what's on this calendar?
is it with the holidays? With the
No, it's not.
holidays?
No, that's the 17th.
Yeah.
So it's on a
It's
weekend.
for between
Oh,
What do we-
Eileen was doing us a favor here, folks.
Okay, so which meeting is real and which one? Well, is the 6th,
Either one is fine for us, the 6th or the 20th.
so
We prefer the, I'm sorry, we prefer the 6th.
it's, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I mean, if they want 6th, what do you have time to?
We have not checked
Actually,
notice.
we got the, yeah, they.
It's a 10-day notice, and they'd have to get their list updated perhaps, but the biggest thing is publication, and I assume we have time
We
to
can do
do
that.
that. Well, we can set it for that if there's some problem in terms of getting the notice out in time or getting it published. They'll just let us know, we'll change it. The actual date will be set based upon the notice that's given.
Okay. That closes that, I think.
I wouldn't want to change to that second meeting in September because I want to be at the meeting. I'm going to be gone now.
We'll aim for the
Okay,
6th.
thank you.
Thanks. Okay, that order of business is completed, thank you. We're gonna move on to the historic element of the master plan. We have on the agenda a discussion and a vote on the revised historic preservation element. Just give it a moment.
While you're giving it a moment, Madam Chair, let me just bring the board up to speed, because some of you may be a little surprised that this is on the agenda. But we being the board, or Eileen, received the revised historic preservation element, and we were able to schedule the public hearing. This is an amendment to the master plan, which means all the notice requirements that are set forth in the municipal land use law regarding master plans and amendments to master plans have to be followed. We were able to do that through Eileen's efforts and her office's efforts. There's a 10-day publication notice, and there's notice to clerks of adjacent municipalities and certain other entities, including the Essex County Planning Board. Eileen, I'm going to ask you on the record, as I said I would, has notice been given in accordance with the statute?
It has been.
Okay, so, well, what that means is that we, the board, can hold the public hearing on this historic preservation element that's been presented to us. You will all recall that we got the first version of this I believe in late 2022. There was a presentation made, there were some questions that were raised. I believe the chair appointed a subcommittee to work with the Historic Preservation Commission to address issues that the board had raised, to reach out to the public in addition to whatever outreach had been previously done. And that process, I assume, took place, strike that. That process did take place. And I believe the package that we received last week or a week and a half ago is the result of those revisions. Now, they were not black-lined or any of that kind of thing, so it may be worthwhile to have Graham point out, what the actual changes were. Hopefully, the board's had the opportunity to review the plan. I see there's one copy that's sitting on the table over there. And at the end of this, the chair will close first there'll be a discussion about the plan. At some point after the discussion with the board, the presentation, I guess, that Graham's gonna make, the chair will open it up for public comment. Remember, it's comment, it's not interrogation, it's not questions, it's comment about the plan. She'll then, at the conclusion of that, close the public portion, and the board then can consider whether they want to approve the master plan amendment by incorporating this housing preservation element, modify portions of it if there are portions that have to be modified. If those modifications are relatively innocuous or minor, we could probably do them here, and you can still vote on it tonight, and there'd be a need for another public hearing. If they're major kinds of things, and I'll reserve judgment on that until there is such a proposal made. But if they are substantial items, we'll probably have to to renotice the hearing on now the quote amended historic preservation law. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank
So to that point, yes, thank you for recapping that, this had been presented to us previously. The board that was serving last year had some questions, concerns, follow-up. We raised those in session here, appointed a subcommittee who has met with you, Graham. I did not serve on it, so I would love to hear sort of the update and the readout. We have received, updates a few times from Allison, provided them at planning board meetings, but if you could sort of walk us through what it was, what the concerns were, and how they've been addressed, I think that would help the board
Absolutely.
paint that picture.
Just
Thank
gonna
you.
pull them from our site.
Oh, yes. Eileen, is that mic on?
As short as. All right. Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Board. Graham Petto, serving as Township Planner this evening. First of all, thank you to members of the subcommittee and to the HPC as well for their work in this process over the past number of months. I did kind of outline a timeline just to kind of supplement Mr. Buzak's commentary just for the benefit of the board as we get into this discussion. So the first presentation of the draft historic preservation element, which has been prepared by the Historic Preservation Commission with their historic preservation consultant, Barton Ross, was presented here to this board on November 2nd of last year. At that November 2nd meeting, the planning board moved to constitute a committee to review the draft plan in detail. The appointed members of that committee were Mr. Halpert, Ms. Nevis, and Mr. Baer at the time. The committee met twice on November 17th and November 29th. And in those two meetings, we sat down and we formulated a series of recommendations, which were then provided to the full planning board for their December 7th meeting. At the December 7th meeting, the board considered the initial recommendations and felt, given the time of the year, December, with potentially new board members coming on board, that they would carry this discussion and consideration of the recommendations into the new calendar year. On January 18th, the board again brought up the discussion of the recommendations from the subcommittee, and the board walked through those recommendations from the subcommittee in detail and enumerated each of those and discussed whether each of those recommendations should be advanced back to the Historic Preservation Commission for consideration. the planning board recommended that the full content of the recommendation list go over to the HPC. So they did not remove or edit the recommendations from the committee. Everything went forward over to the Historic Preservation Commission. I did also just want to note that at the January 18th meeting as well, I gave a pretty detailed presentation on the relationship of historic preservation, master plan elements, and how that relates to ordinances. This is not a master plan element adoption, does not create ordinances, does not landmark properties. There is an entire separate process within your ordinance that requires a nomination report, vetting of the property, public notice, hearings, all kinds of things. So it was important to kind of clarify the distinction of the master plan element as an advisory policy document versus ordinances and regulations, which are a township committee function. And then in the pendency between January and June of this year, the edits were worked on by myself. I carried forward the edits and the recommendations from this board over to Mr. Ross, and we worked on incorporating those recommendations into the plan document that you all have received. In addition, I just wanted to note that the first recommendation, I believe it was recommendation A from the planning board memo, was to conduct an additional public outreach session and work on some additional public outreach. So the Historic Preservation Commission held a public information session on June 14th of this year. The meeting was broadcast live on the Township YouTube channel, at which Mr. Ross reviewed the plan in detail and provided information on the plan and the properties that are contained within it, and had allowed the public the opportunity to comment at that time. So next, I just want to switch gears, and what I'll do is kind of walk through the recommendations list and reference where we've made corresponding comments within the plan, just to kind of illustrate that. And I'm going to do this. Our recommendation list is not sequential with the plan section, so it's a little bit herky-jerky, but I'll kind of walk everybody through it. So the first is in section 1.1 of the historic preservation element of the master plan on page 5. We've addressed board recommendation subletter D. And that board recommendation, one second, let me just pull that up. Sorry, lots of, was to detail the benefits of historic preservation for property owners. So here the board was seeking that we kind of further clarify and provide more contextual information on the benefits to property owners. So 3 additional points have been added to this subsection, numbers 4, 5, and 6. Mr. Ross incorporated a number of research references to research by Donathan Ripkema, the economics of historic preservation, benefits of historic preservation designation for property owners by Jonathan Mabry, a PhD, who analyzed a number of studies around the country that found historic district designations can have a positive impact on property values. So there's a lot of analytical information, which the board felt was missing. There wasn't really justification or facts presented. So there's some cited studies now within the historic preservation plan element to further expound upon those points. And so that's addressing that subletter D section. So those 3 sections, I'm not going to read all the text at length. It's kind of a lot of text that we've incorporated. The next is section 6.2, historic areas identified for local designations on pages 51 and 52 of the plan. This has been modified to address the board's recommendation letter B, which stated that the plan should detail the methodology and selection criteria for historic preservation resource identification. Within this section, two sections of language have been added to further detail where the source of some of these property identification is from. So the first is that there are historic walking tours prepared by the Milburn Short Hills Historical Society that have served as the basis for property identification within the plan. And then there is another section that kind of expounds upon my earlier comment, which says, while identification in the historic preservation element is a preliminary step, a more robust local designation process, as described in section 4.1.1 of this plan element and codified in Milburn Code section 804.2, requires that any identified properties within the plan must meet specific criteria requirements prior to formal designation and follow a robust designation process, including research, a nomination report, and then a full ordinance adoption process. This is, and as noted in the Milburn Code, that designation process is guided by the National Register criteria for historic preservation. So we wanted to include that language so that it's very apparent that this is not, impacting property specifically. There is a full process for historic preservation designation. The next change comes in section 7.2, challenges implementing historic preservation policies on page 76 of the plan. This addresses board recommendation subletter C, which is provide details on costs of historic preservation. So this section, we added item number 8, which addresses some of the financial challenges. The board recommendation wanted the plan to address that, there are economic challenges to providing resources and funding. So now the plan speaks to those challenges and says the township faces challenges implementing historic preservation policies due to a lack of education on the benefits and costs associated with historic preservation and the balance of these issues. The plan now also says limited knowledge on the benefits of historic preservation, coupled with concerns related to cost to maintain historic properties, presents a unique challenge and resistance to policy implementation. So we're recognizing cost limitations or other factors as a challenge to historic preservation in the community. Section 9.1, the recommendations section on page 79, addresses board recommendations subletter E and F. Subletter E says that recommends that the plan evaluate threshold review of modifications to residential properties subject to historic preservation review to determine, what types of features should be subject to that. Again, this is recommending ordinance amendments to address those things, not something so this is an aspirational statement, not a policy change at this point. So the first one is under subsection 1, subletter E says, evaluate the means to mitigate administrative impacts of historic preservation review on residential property owners. Such examination should include review and potential modifications of homes, properties subject to HPC review, and mechanisms to streamline the HPC review process for homeowners. So that's a recommendation that we clean that process up, make it easier for homeowners that would be subject to that review. And then addressing subsection F, which is balancing economic development, sustainability, and historic preservation. Here, both the subcommittee and the board, understand kind of the push-pull relationship of historic preservation and solar panels, historic preservation and sustainability, and how we can better find a balance for those things here within the community. So we've incorporated some additional language to provide that. There's a number of sections. F, G, H, and I have all been added. The one that I think is best addressing this is subsection H in this section, develop a holistic sustainability approach that couples reuse of historic buildings with modern sustainability approaches, including green roof, solar panels, efficient insulation, and stormwater management techniques. Opportunities to uniquely balance sustainability with historic preservation should be explored by the township. So again, that aspirational statement trying to strive that balance to address those things. I think that was largely it. Again, there's a lot of text associated with this, so you're happy to read it, but I don't want to bore you all with that. But happy to answer any questions
Thank you.
if anyone has.
Questions from members of the board?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Graham. If I'm going by Ed's proposed agenda, Graham is going to provide information. We as a board could ask questions, and then we move to public comment. Okay, let's open it up to members of the public who would want to make a comment on the historic preservation. Historic element, thank you. I'm missing a word in there.
Historic element of the master.
Historic preservation element of the master plan. If you want to make a comment, we invite you to come up to the mic, introduce yourself, state your address, and then you can make a comment.
Do you have to be sworn?
You would have to be sworn in as well, so we have to raise your right hand.
Do you swear from testimony you're about to give in this proceeding to be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Your name, for the record, spelling your name, please.
JUSTIN SELAM.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Justin Steelan. I live at 89 Elm Street. I'm 17 years old and I'm a rising senior at Milburn High School. I've been living at 89 Elm Street since 2007. And this summer, I've been volunteering with the Milburn Short Hills Historical Society as an intern. And during that time, I got the chance to learn a lot about the history of Milburn Short Hills, as well as play an active role in preserving that history. And I think anybody can see that, you just look out the window, the new condo developments and the new construction all over town is kind of changing the look and the feel of Milburn Short Hills. And that is why I believe that it is more important now than ever to preserve our town's history. our town's history is one of the many things that makes Milburn Short Hills so special. You know, a lot of other towns in this area, you don't see this unique and beautiful history that we have here. And I believe that if we don't move to protect that history, we risk losing the elements that make our town stand out among other New Jersey towns. And I'm here tonight because I feel strongly about this. I'm proud of the town that I grew up in, and I believe that it is the responsibility of those in charge to make sure that the beauty of Milburn is preserved for future generations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public want to participate? Thanks, that will conclude the public comment section. And now we can have a board discussion or motion and take action on the revised historic preservation element of the master plan.
I'll make a motion to adopt this element.
We have a second.
I'll second.
Michael.
Excuse me.
Corey
No,
Apologies.
that's okay. I know you sort of asked for discussion, but maybe we should just ask for discussion on the motion that's been made and seconded. Just in case somebody else wants to, now that we're on the precipice of doing what we need to do, just in case somebody wants something else, that's all. I just want to make
Okay, we'll
sure,
take it.
give everybody the opportunity.
Everybody feels comfortable.
Okay?
Thank you. All right, it's going too fast.
Corey Miller,
Yes.
Allison Campfield,
Yes.
Michael Cohen,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins.
Yes.
Julie VJ.
Yes.
David Costro.
Yes.
Michael Zion.
Yes.
Gaston Halbert.
Yes.
That's all.
I want to first thank the subcommittee and thank everybody and Allison for your steadfast work and say yes.
Can I,
Woo-hoo!
and can I thank Justin? I promise I didn't pay him. This is.
Great, thank you. So
I-
just for the record, that means the planning board has adopted the historic preservation element of the master plan.
That's correct. I would normally do a memorializing resolution, so we have something separate and apart from the minutes. I have a resolution that I prepared, I sent it out. All the board members probably did not get it. I don't know if I was able to distribute it or not.
I did not, I have
Okay.
just.
And what I just asked you to do is to consider it and adopt it tonight, and this way that we get this sort of off the table. It's a resolution adopting the historic preservation element, August 3, 2023, which is the date of the plan, as a component of the master plan of the Township of Milburn. The whereas clauses refer to the fact that we have a master plan. We did a re-examination in 2018, that there's been a new historic preservation element that's been prepared referencing this particular document, that the board has considered and discussed it, that we've held a public hearing tonight, and the public hearing was done in accordance with statutory notice. And after the public hearing, the board is satisfied that the report is consistent with the goals and objectives of the Township of Milburn and the board regarding the manner in which historic structures and locations within the township should be addressed, and that the adoption and implementation of the revised historic preservation element is in the public interest to protect the public health and safety and will promote the general welfare and the goals and objectives of the township with regard to historic preservation, and now therefore be resolved as of this date that the board hereby approves and adopts the historic preservation element, that the final version of this shall be placed in a bound volume with a certified copy in the office of the township clerk and the office of the board, that the secretary is directed to cause a copy of this resolution together with the adopted historic preservation element to be sent to the appropriate entities, including the Office of Planning Advocacy and the Essex County Planning Board, not more than 30 days after tonight, that everyone, professionals and so forth, are directed to take any and all steps necessary to effectuate the purposes of the resolution. So, there's someone to do with that, and
Good job.
we'll take a formal vote again, and this way we'll have the resolution done, if it is the board's desire.
Thank you. Okay, so does somebody move to approve the resolution, adopt the resolution?
I move to approve it.
Okay, we have it. Maggie made the motion,
Second.
Corey a second.
Corey Miller.
Yep.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Mike Cohen.
Yes.
Maggie Higgins.
Yes.
Shane BJ.
Yes.
David Cosgrove.
Yes.
Michael Zion.
Yes.
Gaston Halper.
Yes.
Beth Sil.
Yes.
I didn't want to present the resolution if it was going to be voted down, so I wanted to get a preview of where we're going.
Thank you all. Efficient.
Thank you. Very exciting.
Thank you.
We're gonna move on from the application of historic element. Is that in Eric?
That's your call. I think I think we want to be really here for the HPC and the votes.
If you're okay, if we move forward.
Yes,
on
I think
our-
that's
You
fine.
may be dismissed.
Thank you.
That's
Um,
nice then.
I mean, you're welcome to hang.
No pressure there.
All right, we have two ordinances that we received, both the language of the ordinance as well as planners reports from Graham, thank you. I think we should discuss them one at a time. So we can begin in the order as they appear on the agenda, which is ordinance 264523. Yep, which is the amendment to development regulations as an ordinance section 301, and then the other one also includes 301, but the other subsection.
Correct.
Okay, so I will
Happy to
turn it
walk
over
through.
to you to,
Sure, I will walk through this for you all. So again, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Graham Petto, serving this evening as Township Planner and Board Planner. Both ordinances before you this evening are products of the Zoning Code Examination Subcommittee here within the Township. I just want to thank the members of that committee, Mayor Miggins and Allison Canfield here from the board who serve on that committee. It has been very productive. We've been providing a lot of ordinance updates, and I appreciate the work and time that those members have provided. The first ordinance before you this evening, 2645-23, presents a series of amendments and updates to the words and phrases defined section of the DRZ, and also a few corresponding reference edits to DRZ section 607, the off-street parking and loading requirements as well. I'll walk through the summary of the ordinance. We have 15 different notes or edits, high-level summary points. There's a lot of text that's been presented within the ordinance, so I don't want to read through the entire thing. And again, just for a reminder for the benefit of the board, the purpose of your review this evening is to do a consistency review to determine whether the ordinance before you is consistent or inconsistent with the master plan. So again, as I mentioned, we have received, as part of our zoning code examination work, we received the zoning board produces an annual report of recommendations that they, if they're seeing repeated ordinances or issues with the code, they present recommendations. Some of those have been addressed by the ordinance herein. We also spoke at length with Ms. Davitt as well, things that she's seen or issues that are neglected in the code as well. So I'll talk through these. So the first, we've added a definition for the term basement to support building height, story, and floor area ratio definitions. Presently, the ordinance does not have a definition of what a basement is, so that is a little bit of an issue. We've modified the building height calculations to consider the height of rooftop decks or spaces in the calculation of height. We've clarified the definition for financial institutions to be a more modern interpretation and current with today's standards. Revised the floor area ratio residential definition to consider structures more than 2 stories, basements and attics, and accessory structure floor area above the first 300 square feet. By doing this, we're kind of carving off the 300 square feet and giving an allowance for some other areas. We've amended the definition for floor area ratio non-residential to now be floor area ratio non-residential and multifamily. There is now a definition for habitable room, which is also consistent with the UCC construction code definition for habitable room. That helps with calculation of floor area ratio as well. We've amended the definition of medical office to streamline the definition and better distinguish between medical and retail service uses. Presently, I think there's some issues with yoga studio, massage therapists being considered a medical office, which is not really the same. So there were some use issues. We've amended the definition of retail services to incorporate massage and spa services as a retail service, just like a haircut. Those are presently considered medical office. We've added a definition for shopping center that presently was not defined, and this relates to our off-street parking amendment. There are parking requirements for shopping centers, but there was no definition of what a shopping center is. So now we've created one, so now there's a cross-reference in the ordinance. We've revised the story definition to exclude basements below grade. We've also added a definition for half story to coordinate with other zoning amendments. We've amended the definition of swimming pool to be consistent with other references to swimming pool. We have a swimming pool chapter separate and apart from the DRZ, which defined a swimming pool, so now we have the same definition in both locations. We've modernized the definition of theater in the ordinance, amended the definition of front, side, and rear yards. Currently, yards are measured from the front, side, and rear property line to the nearest point of the principal structure, which if you have kind of an undulating facade, you get a no man's land. So now we've just said between the facade wall and the property line, we can better define those yards. And then a couple of other just minor edits. We believe that as part of this review, I've provided a relationship to the master plan. So we believe that it's consistent in two areas specifically with the master plan. The first is the goal statement to protect the character of established residential neighborhoods and encourage land use and development at an appropriate scale and density. The definitional amendments will refine regulations impacting residential developments, including building heights, yards, and floor area ratio. The amendments close certain loopholes and ensure that the DRC is operating as intended to protect character and encourage development at the appropriate scale and density. And the second area where we found consistency with the master plan is to promote clear, user-friendly, and transparent application review and public hearing processes for development proposals and applications so as to ensure an effective and well-publicized mechanism for residents to report quality of life issues and code violations. So these proposed amendments include various common sense provisions, closing loopholes, modernizing outdated definitions, removing cross-references, and better coordinating between definitions. These amendments will make the DRC more user-friendly, easier for residents, the administration, and professionals alike. So that's my summary.
Thank you. I have one question.
Sure.
Am I reading it's 30121, the financial institutions? It's
Yes.
like on the second page of it.
Let me just pull the ordinance.
Yeah. So my read on it was that, you clarified the definition to talk about establishments provide on-site financial services to clients. And then the second sentence, I don't know what the verb is, but it says such businesses that provide financial services but do not host clients on site shall be considered offices. So that they do fall within this, or they fall separately?
So they are considered to be offices because they're not functioning with clients coming in to do business.
My question there
Sure.
was the impacts of parking. So that in that instant, that businesses that provide financial services not hosting clients on site, I guess that it gets to the zoning question. I'm kind of thinking, what's the next step?
Mhm.
But if it's a business that is specifically not intended to bring people in, to bring traffic in, what are the impacts to parking? And is designated something as an office, going to give it an elevated parking requirement such that then we have somebody come and say, oh, we're not gonna have anybody, then they're gonna need to come get a variance.
Sure.
That's more of a zoning concern, but.
Yeah, so I think, the way that this was worded and kind of addressing some of the issues that we've identified with staff is that, banks, brokerage firms, savings and loan associations, and mortgage companies typically have client-facing
Right.
interactions, and folks are coming in to do their business, do their banking business. So by carving off the last grouping and saying, if you were a financial institution but you don't have client-facing interaction, you're functioning really as an office.
Right.
So that would
Okay.
fall as an office definition.
They have the same parking requirements.
And they have the same.
And they have the same parking requirement.
Thank
It's
you.
just, I think, you don't want you want the financial institutions, you want the people as opposed to
Exactly.
just taking up the space with offices.
Sure,
But they do have the same parking.
that's
requirement.
helpful. Okay, so we really have an
So
impact
it's
to
not
parking,
really-
which is the answer to the question. Thanks. Okay,
Sure.
thank you for
Sure.
explaining the definition.
Absolutely.
Does anybody else have questions on?
Yes.
How is setback calculated now? And I know we're gonna cover exactly what setback is, but how is it calculated now? We took out the nearest point of the building, and in the setback definition, it says, okay, it's from the easement or from the property line. But then we don't know where now on the house it's supposed to go because we took out nearest point of. Is that anywhere else in the?
So let me just see, so are you referring to the yard? So because we made the corresponding change in the yard definition
Yeah, not
too.
the setback. Just the-
Right, not the setback, but the yard, and that's where.
Right,
So the setback, I believe,
To the nearest portion of the building to the line.
correct.
that's not a setback.
That is the setback.
No, but that's not in the definition of setback.
We didn't define setback, we defined the yard. We're just changing the definition. of the yard.
Understood, but if there's a definition of setback
Mhm.
in the ordinances now, or in
Yes.
the DRZ, and it says you measure from the property line or easement.
To the nearest portion of the building.
So we
That
took
is
that out
Of yard.
of
Of
yard,
yard.
but that's where
Right.
it says that. So now,
Because we're trying to determine what's happening is we're getting mostly for rear yards. If you don't have a completely flat back plane, you have a portion that shoots out. And the way it said, when we were doing rear yard area, it stopped where the building was. So you had this whole area. What is it? It's not rear yard, it's not
not rear
side.
yard,
So that
right.
was the purpose of redefining rear and side yard. So it would be considered, because it wasn't considered anything, couldn't do a deck, couldn't do anything, because is it your rear yard? Not according to the ordinance.
right.
And there
Understand.
is a definition for setback separately in the ordinance. And it says the distance between a street line or lot line and that portion of the lot where structures are located.
Good, so if I come in and I'm going to do setback, I have a vestibule in front of my house, and then my house kind of undulates back. My setback is going to be where my house is, where the house is, not the vestibule.
No, it's gonna be the vestibule. It's gonna be the closest part to that property line.
It doesn't say that anywhere.
Yes, it does. That's what it says.
No, he
Because
just read
we're
it.
structures,
That's for
so a
structure.
vestibule is a
Closest
structure.
part of the structure,
No, it doesn't say closest part.
and for the setback. It's always
Read it
measured to
again.
the.
It says the distance between a street or lot line and that portion of the lot where structures are located.
Where's
That's
closest?
for the yard, that's
No,
not
that's
for
setback.
setback. No, it's not. That's for the yard, it's just determining the yard area. For
Graham,
for
was
the
that
nearest
setback
part of
or-
the structure, so as soon as the nearest part of your structure happens, that's where the setback is measured to.
I understand that, that's the way it should be calculated.
Mhm.
What definition did you?
I just read the setback
Right.
definition.
But he
Correct.
didn't say nearest is Graham's,
Is I think.
That's
that's-
just on
Right, and the way we got around that, it was in yard.
no.
And so now we took it out, so there's no way of like.
So how do we
anybody can say
reflect
any
This should
portion of
be,
the house
right,
is
so this
setback.
should be a recommendation back to the governing body to amend the setback definition to incorporate the nearest. reference.
Yes.
That's perfect.
Setback definition to include
Nearest.
nearest point of structure.
Correct.
I mean, you're gonna have to do that, but I wrote that language now, I can repeat it. Do you want me to repeat it?
No, I'm gonna call Graham on Friday.
Graham, you
We'll have a
got
nice long
that?
conversation.
Great. Sorry, we have a planner on.
Yeah.
Thank you,
That's
thanks
funny.
guys for walking us through that, okay,
Yes, thank you.
that makes sense. Any other questions? Okay. Do we have a motion to declare this ordinance not inconsistent with the master plan? Yes, Maria?
As revised?
With, well, this element as is, with the recommendation that the setback definition should be revised to include nearest point of structure.
Yes.
Yes, you can make that motion.
Sure.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you, Allison.
Corey Dillard,
Yes.
Allison Campfield,
Yes.
Michael Cohen,
Yes.
Maggie Megan.
Yes.
Srini Vijay,
Yes.
David Cosgrove,
Yes,
Michael Zion,
Yes.
Gaston Halbert.
Yes.
That's all.
Yes. Great. Moving on to our second ordinance, 264623. Take it away, Graham.
Sure thing. Again, this is a product of the zoning code examination subcommittee. This ordinance does a couple of different things. One, and I'll talk through these in detail. So first, the ordinance before you adds a maximum building height calculated in stories for residential zone districts. Presently, the DRZ does not regulate the number of stories that can be built in the residential zone, only a maximum height in feet. There is not a maximum number of stories within the residential zone districts. Second, the ordinance before you adds a prevailing front yard setback mechanism to determine required minimum and maximum front yard setbacks in residential zone districts. An associated definition is provided to explain the methodology for associated calculations for prevailing setbacks. So to achieve these amendments, the proposed ordinance adds a definition to DRZ 301 and amends various bulk regulation standards in DRZ 606, which are the zone requirements. So first, creates a definition for a prevailing front yard setback, which is the average front yard setback in feet, calculated as the average front yard setback of the 6 nearest principal structures on the same side of the street, 3 on each side of the property, and within the same block and zone district. Additional methodologies are provided for treatment of corner lots and outlier properties. An outlier property we define as one that has a setback 2 times the average or less than half of the average for the prevailing front yard setback. The ordinance replaces the existing 40-foot minimum front yard setback in the R3, 4, 5, and 6 zones, and the 24-foot minimum front yard setback in the R7 zone. The 20-foot minimum front yard setback for attached dwellings in the R8, and the street side minimum setback for apartments in the R8. These setbacks are replaced with prevailing front yard setback standards to maintain neighborhood character, so everybody is kind of building in a consistent line. And the setbacks include a permitted range of deviation from the prevailing setback standards. So in the R3 and R4 zone, you're allowed to move beyond or in front of the prevailing front yard setback line by 15%. In the R4, 5, 6, and 8 zone, you're allowed to move above or below the prevailing front yard setback line by 25%. And in the R7, you're also allowed to move above or below by 25%, but must have a minimum of at least 5 feet setback from the front property line. The intent in lower permitted ranges in the R3 and R4 districts is to account for larger prevailing setbacks. These are much larger lots with deeper setbacks. While the permitted range is smaller, the absolute permitted range in feet will be roughly the same as the other zones. There are a number of notes within the code now, which include requirements for front yard setbacks. We've cleaned that up as well. Contain certain caveats that have caused confusion and kind of not been provided clarity on interpretation. So we've eliminated those and created a much more concrete standard. In addition, we have incorporated standards to communicate when there is no prevailing setback that can be calculated. So you have a property that's being developed and there's no neighboring properties to do that prevailing setback line. We retain the minimum front yard setbacks that are within the ordinance presently of 40 feet or 20 feet in the R8 zone. And then in the building heights and stories, we've established those. So we have maximum building heights and stories. The zoning standard does not currently exist in residential districts. Furthermore, the R8 zone is actually missing maximum building height number. There is actually no maximum building height in the R8 zone presently. So we've incorporated in the R3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 zones a maximum of 2.5 stories of height. And in the R8 zone, 32 feet, because there was not a height number now, as well as 2.5 stories for attached dwellings. That's largely it. Does anyone have any questions? I know there was a lot of content to cover. Yes.
Just a minor question. So on the front setback for R3 to R6, it's 40 feet right now. And
Correct.
It's changing to plus or minus 15%.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So why not just say 34 feet from 46 instead of plus or minus 15? I mean, just like refer back.
So that's because prevailing is calculated by looking at the setback of the adjacent 6. So it's going to vary based on the neighborhood context. And the purpose of doing it this way is there are different neighborhoods within the R3 and R4 zone that have different varying existing setbacks. And the purpose of this also is to address issues that the zoning board is seeing. They're seeing a frequent parade of front vestibule, front porch enclosures, or little entryway. So by giving this prevailing neighborhood character setback, everybody's subject to 40 feet now. The neighborhood may all have 24-foot setbacks. So everybody has to come in to the zoning board for these types of things. By now incorporating prevailing character with this plus or minus, it should allow for homeowners to do those modifications as of right instead of having to seek relief with the board. That's the purpose.
I have a similar question
Sure.
about sort of this using the percentages and what will sort of happen over time. So on R7, 1 minimum section 3, I like how you said like 75%, but no less than.
Yes.
Because of course, over time, if everyone keeps going to 75% and then the street, everyone's inching up. So I thought that made sense. In section 4, there's like another, E3, 1, like it's, it's the minimum front setback. it's the same thing, 75%, but I had put a note, whichever, like, you know, or a certain number, whichever is greater. I like the way you phrase it here, but no less than. Should we add a no less than there as well? I mean, the same thing could happen, right? You keep inching closer to the street and now you've got,
That's a very good point.
So interesting enough, yes, so when you do it, it's, so the 85% is gonna tend towards 0, never gonna get there. The 75% is gonna tend towards 5 feet, never really gonna get there. But what we may want to do, and I know this takes a lot of manpower or whatever, but actually to do our due diligence, go to the neighborhoods, figure out what that is, and maybe do specific setbacks for the neighborhoods because we know they're different. But otherwise, I do think that we are gonna end up with, like, we're gonna, this blanket statement, if we do it for every single neighborhood, we're still gonna get the zoning board applications, right? But if we actually do our due diligence and go in and see what certain neighborhoods have, and maybe put that in our ordinance, that will help the zoning board and also help preserve the character of the neighborhood.
well, I think they do that with the prevailing, you know, definition, but then you're saying, but then in state a minimum.
A minimum, but it's,
That's
well,
appropriate for that.
so whatever minimum you're gonna state, you can leave it at 40, right? And then you're gonna tend to 40, eventually, like you said, over
Yeah,
time,
you
let's
get
say
there,
it's
right?
50 years, yeah, you're gonna get there at 40. I've seen contractors tear down an entire house, leave a middle wall, call it a renovation,
Yeah.
and then build 2 more rooms in front, right?
Right.
And like, who knows what they'll do, so it will happen.
The creep.
Yeah, it's gonna
Yeah.
creep.
Mhm.
And so just to, and it
So I
might
think
not
the
be
way it
really
was handled in the.
specify one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if 40 doesn't fit for all the neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that it doesn't fit for, what is it?
Sure.
Right, so if it's 20, that way, that neighborhood's not gonna come in for variances every time they wanna, you know, they wanna put a vestibule on.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
That's a helpful comment.
you got that, so with the recommendation to explore a minimum.
Incorporating minimums, a hard value. Yeah, you certainly do that.
Any other questions?
But presumably, you know, it's a good idea, but we have to just make sure that by incorporating the minimum, we haven't undercut the whole intent of this, which is to.
That's the balance, right?
Or instead of the minimum, do the prevailing. We
Do the
find the
prevailing.
prevailing, and then we give you 15%, and that's it. The prevailing stays, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so as not to trend the prevailing,
Yeah,
that was my concern.
So just to clarify, just what you're saying, so don't allow for anything forward of the prevailing, leave the prevailing as the maximum, and then you can go rearward of the prevailing
So just
by
define
the
what the
percentage.
prevailing is for each
Yeah,
neighborhood.
define what it is for a particular neighborhood, like this would have been 40 for all of them, so the prevailing would have been 40, and you can go 15 above or below.
Mhm.
And so it's obviously gonna vary
For
for the
each-
different neighborhoods.
For each R or for each neighborhood?
It depends
I
on
think
who
you
want
gotta
to
do it
preserve
by-
it. It's, I know, I said, it was a lot of work, but that to me is really how it should be done, if you wanted to really preserve
You
it.
define neighborhood.
Well, you have 6 houses on each side and just kind of look and say, hey, we're here and here.
You can't do it for every 6 houses, have a different standard.
No, it's not for every 6 houses, but it would be, let's say, the street, right, from this end to that end, or the circle, right, and.
But that's what he's doing with prevailing. I mean, just you're saying to specify differences for each.
Yeah, I like the 100% of prevailing, because no matter where you are, you would look at
Right.
your surrounding.
Correct.
houses,
Correct.
You know, which sort of controls for exactly that, as opposed to making up prevailing, you know, you're gonna pick random dots all over town and then develop it.
No.
That's like I'm thinking you're looking like a lighting plan, like, you know.
No, but to set the, like, look at the neighborhood, if the setbacks of most of the houses are 200 feet, 100 feet, whatever it is, look at that neighborhood and say, okay, so we're gonna go 150 feet and go 15 above, 15 below, or whatever, it's 25 above.
But I don't understand how you define, I mean, I understand if you said R3, R4, R5, that's
Right.
a defined thing. How do you define neighborhood? It can't just be every street has its own prevailing thing written into an ordinance, that's just unworkable.
The definition of, I think it should just be 100% of prevailing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Whatever's nearby,
I think if
that's
the-
your,
if-
on average, that's where you.
I think if the intent of this discussion is to limit the creep forward,
Right,
set the prevailing as the minimum. So you can't come forward if you want to come forward of the prevailing, you have to come forward. You have to
right, you
seek
might say,
relief.
because my neighbor, they're 10 feet up, but the average is here and I'm stuck and this is why it's a hardship, it doesn't work for me, then they can come bring an application, but they should have to come make that case of why they can.
Correct. And I
It
I
should
think
be 100%.
allowing a homeowner also to present the prevailing as, the calculated average, also reduces the degree of variance relief. So, for example, I'm thinking about neighborhood, we're already set back 20 feet, your average prevailing is 20, you need to do a front vestibule that's gonna give you a 19-foot setback. Right now, the ordinance is 40, so your degree of deviation is huge. So the board is like, this is a significant variance, but now if we have prevailing, you're going from 20 to 19, it's much more minor in consideration, and it gives the homeowner a better case to present to the
And
board.
if it's in the ordinance, then they don't have to apply for variance, right? It's just-
Correct.
They're
If it's-
20, then they're.
If they're at 22 and they want to go down to 20, they can do that, right? Correct.
Okay,
So I think as
100%
100% prevailing, I think that probably is a better solution.
I like that.
But now what you just said though, doesn't that then over time cause the creep? Because if you said it was 20, you want to do 19, that's fine.
I
Now
mean,
you make the average,
yeah, but that's for the zoning board to determine if they're gonna allow it.
If they're
They
gonna
might-
grant
they
that
might say-
deviation.
but if they grant that, they keep granting it over time, you get, the average keeps going
I think-
shorter.
I think, honestly, I think this is probably gonna prevent the zoning board from allowing people, if we're giving you an extra 15% and you want 20%, I think they're gonna, I don't think they're gonna be too keen on, especially if this is a
Granting these.
new ordinance. Hey, we just gave you an extra 20 feet, but you want 25.
Yeah, like take
Deal
what you
with that.
got, yeah, so you think it will do what we're hoping to do.
I think they will.
And again, just to kind of circle back to what I've talked about at the beginning of the zoning code examination committee, the Board of Adjustment is required by the municipal land use law to furnish an annual report. So we're going to get a report of findings of how this is working, at the end of next year. The board will say, well, everybody came in and asked for this issue with front yard setback. This is an issue that we're seeing with the ordinance. Please fix this. So, we're going to have that reporting mechanism over time to do some health checkups on these ordinances. and make
Without
sure.
septic creep.
Correct.
We see it.
Mhm. If we see that there's a problem, everybody's coming in and asking to move closer.
Well, I'm just saying, if we start, 2019's okay, so now the average is not 20 anymore, the prevailing is not 20, it's 19 and a half, so now I'm gonna do 18 and a half. Oh, well, that's not so different, and over time, without having to even go for a variance,
Mhm.
you push, you.
Yeah, so by requiring it to just be that front.
The original prevailing.
That creep would be slower than the 75%
Yes.
creep.
It's
It's a slower
a
creep.
slower creep.
Also, this is we're the planning board, so we're reviewing the TC's ordinance.
Mhm.
You're wearing your planning board hat. As the TC, they would have to say, all right, we need to do something about this and create a new ordinance,
Yeah.
or not, yeah. But that's
Sure. No, but great points,
fun
thank you.
math
Yes,
exercise.
it was.
So the recommendation would be to stick with 100% of prevailing.
Correct.
On this. So, okay. Other
Quick question,
questions?
if I may. No, do we know if all the houses in RS3 have a similar setback?
I think that there's a broad range of
Broad range,
setbacks,
right?
yes.
And it varies by neighborhood, it varies by
Street.
street.
Mhm. We even saw issues with opposite sides of the street. That's why we have the prevailing definition of has to be the same side of the street, because you could have, 50-foot setbacks on one side and 30 on the other, so you have to look at just one side of the street to do that prevailing.
So can you say then, put a date in here, so when this is signed into effect, can you say the prevailing, prevailing setback as of 2023?
Interesting.
And that way,
I would avoid
it's
it.
set right there, you don't have to go and figure out what it is. There are plenty of plans, or somebody has to submit something, but we have some type of historical record that we can go back and say, no, you can't do this.
That's a good recommendation. I need to think about that. Functionally, how someone
We
like
can make
Eileen
that
would
recommendation
enforce
that
that.
we sort of establish, right, like, you have to print the land use,
Baseline.
yeah, the baseline.
Yeah, I'm just wearing my hat of having sat as a municipal planner with the zoning official, how you do that, and enforce that over time is kind of my question. I think it's fine to include as a recommendation. We'll just have to think about that. So
Okay.
what data we have to support that process.
I think we can include it as a planning board recommendation, yeah.
So I can just circle back to talk through the sections of the master plan that we identified for consistency with these modifications. The first is objective 1.01 of the master plan, protect the character of established residential neighborhoods and encourage land use and development at an appropriate scale and density. The prevailing front yard setback mechanism inherently tailors zoning standards to the established conditions in the neighborhood, further establishing an explicit 2.5-story maximum number of stories codifies a scale common throughout much of the township's residential neighborhoods, and the inclusion of a half-story incentivizes buildings of houses with sloped roofs and those dormered styles. The second is evaluate as necessary the effectiveness of existing land use regulations to ensure that new residential development and additions to existing homes are compatible with the prevailing neighborhood context. Specifically, this is a recommendation from the master plan, review the R6 zone to ensure that new construction is not excessively bulky in relation to existing neighborhood context. As expressed, in my previous point, these amendments are intended to ensure development's location and height correspond to existing conditions in residential neighborhoods. And then the third objective statement or goal statement from the master plan, monitor recent tear downs and new construction in single-family districts to determine whether additional zoning modifications are necessary to protect neighborhood character. The proposed amendments presented in this ordinance mitigate certain instances that may occur where a developer seeks to demolish an existing home to maximize development yield contrary to existing character. This includes development of 3-story dwellings and locating a dwelling as close to a front yard setback as possible, regardless of the prevailing neighborhood context setback.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions to discuss? I will move that ordinance 264623 is not inconsistent with the master plan, with a recommendation to change the language to reflect 100% prevailing and explore if there's a way to baseline property setbacks from 2023. Do we have a second? Second.
Corey Miller,
Yes.
Allison Canfield,
Yes.
Michael Cohen,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Trudy DJ,
Yes.
David Cosgrove,
Yes.
Michael Zion,
Yes.
Anton Halbert,
Yes.
Beth Zorn.
Yes. Great. That concludes our agenda for the evening. Our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, September 6th, 2023, 7:30 p.m. right here. I move to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night.
Thank you.
8:55.
Nice.
Good job.
Just so you know, 25% are taken out.